All right, we're back, and it's COMP 2007, and it's enterprise computing. It's week 3, even though it says week 2 on here on my slide. Week 3, lesson 3, part 1. Last week, and then I'll explain why we're a little bit of a week behind. Last week, again, we talked about stuff with Azure. We took about an hour to set you guys on Azure. We did lab 1, which is due this Friday, right? And it really deals with what is called server controls that kind of work on the server side. So we're going to kind of go over that a little bit more. I had some questions and emails around, hey, we did our lab 1, but we need to cover more about server controls. Who has access to the book, by the way? I just want to kind of raise the hands. If you guys don't have access, no one has access to the book. It's again, beginning ASP.NET 4.5.1 in C# and VB. They do both examples. Obviously, we're not going to be covering the VB piece. We're going to focus on C#, right? But that's the book that we're going to be using. It's not mandatory. It's not mandatory that you have that, right? But it's good practice to have some kind of reference materials that you can use for ASP.NET. Whether you use this one or another book of your choosing to understand ASP.NET, it's always good to have, Jeremy, it's always good to have a backup, some kind of reference, because ASP.NET has little pieces, and I'm going to try and catch as many of the basics as I can. There are going to be additional, there's additional information that I won't be able to cover only from a time frame perspective. There's so many piece parts to this whole thing, right? So please, it's good to have some kind of backup. I'll also be using this book and the PowerPoint slides that I'm going to be putting up online as part of any little test that I do with you. If we do any Q&A, multiple choice, true, false, all that kind of stuff, you need some kind of reference because there's some terminology you'll be tested on. It won't be. I'm not heavy on testing for terminology and true, false, multiple choice, but again, I'm following Rich's plan, right? So we're kind of doing his course. So there'd be a couple things that I'm going to be doing alongside with him. So please try and stick to the book as much as possible. And that's why I'm going chapter by chapter as well. So let's talk about this. I'm just going to zoom in here. Hopefully I can get this thing going today. Last week I had a kind of a breakdown. I don't understand what happened, but my breakdown, my PowerPoint failed on the Mac. So let's talk about, these are the things we're going to talk about. One thing is you've seen server controls for a couple weeks now. We haven't really called them server controls. We've called them controls, right? But that's really what they are because primarily they work on the server side. That's the way they work. I'm not going to read all of this. This is, again, sometimes I give you a PowerPoint slide and it's for reference. So again, here's the code that I want you to focus on. Here's an input type of text with a value of hello world, the time is, and then this little piece in here we talked about last time, which is almost like a directive it's not quite a directive, it's an expression, that's the right way to say it. When you see this less than or greater, less than sign, percent, and equals, as an example, this is an expression that takes the value that I've got in the code behind file and injects it inside this line of text, inside the value, right? So it gives us this dynamic flavor to things, right? I take stuff, it goes round trip, it goes to the server, grabs that information, and I take this, I use this expression to inject data into my into the value that I'm using. So again, when we talked about that whole round trip business and everything else that we do. So again, the general syntax of all controls that we use on the server side in ASP.NET is this. You have the ASP, right, which kind of says it's an ASP type control, right? The type of control, button, text box, what have you. The ID in caps, right? And then the control name, whatever the control name is, right? And then this piece, which is very important, that shows you where it's running, run at server, right? If you don't see these pieces, then your control is not complete. Right, so this is a standard control set that we see. Here's an example of a control that we use a lot, text box, right? So ASP colon text box ID is a message. This is the kind of message that we're getting, and the run at where? The server. ID message It's a message text box. ID is almost like the variable name, right? Whatever it's called, that we can reference later on the C# side, on the code behind file, right? Just to reiterate this. So I think there's some questions about how that code behind file works, right? You can't access data, and this is going back to that lab you guys did. You can't access data that comes from the code behind file and inject it into, use server controls as an outlet, let's say, unless you have good variable names that are defined here in this capital ID kind of area, right? The difference between capital ID and lowercase ID, like we talked about last time. So kind of, these are the basics, right? Run at would be mandatory because what it does, it indicates to the, because there's no compiler necessarily, it's an interpreted language still. It's still a web language, even though ASP.NET happens. So what we do is we interpret the information that comes in on the website, and then it gets processed on the data side, on the back end, and sent back to the front end, right? In order for them to know how to do that, though, the interpreter needs to have this run at attribute. If you don't have this run at attribute, it won't work. Let's just keep going here. I'm not going to read every piece of it, right? So we drag and drop controls. I think we've talked about dragging and dropping controls from the toolbox into our website. That's what we're doing. Again, I like to think that a best practice, like I mentioned last week, is you drag and drop controls into your. You want to do is drag and drop controls into your mode that you're working with, and I'm going to go in here and start this off for us. It's kind of a bit of a recap as well, because I know some of you send me questions like saying, I don't get this. Someone said to me, even the lab, I don't get the lab, right? I don't understand. I'm not going to say who, right? And it's okay. I'm glad that you did it, right? But I don't get the lab. I don't understand how this whole ASP.NET stuff works, right? So again, as a recap, because I want to make sure everyone gets it, first part is this. There's two sides. There's server side and client side. Client side is your index.asp as an example, or your default.aspx. That's your client side view, if you will. On the back side, you have all on the server side, right? You have this code behind file, and they link together because the way we've coded everything on our document, which I'll show you in a second when I pull up Visual Studio. So let's try this out. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I've got this new project again. It's always good to see this over and over again, I think. So we'll pull up a new project, an ASP.NET web application. I'm going to name this thing COMP2007, and it'll be lesson 3, part 1, right? And again, I'm going to create a Git repository. And from a workflow perspective, if you guys know me and worked with me before, I'm going to do the same kind of workflow like we've done before in other courses, right? So the first thing to do, of course, is I like to link myself to GitHub right from the get-go, right? So let's go back over here. All right, and I've got this. I've got to kind of shrink Visual Studio 1 second because I've got a bit of I'm multitasking here. Computers, they can only do so many things, and sometimes I tax my computer to the point where it's going to stop working one day. I'm going to have to get the new Mac that just got announced. They announced the new MacBook Pro with the 5th generation Intel processors. I think I'm going to have to do this next. And it's all because of Kelly. I got to mention Kelly at least one time on YouTube, right, when I do the thing. And Louis, right, because if I don't mention Louis, Kelly, and Steven, right, if I don't say these names, right, then they know that they think I'm joking around, like I'm doing this broadcast from home or something like that. Blaine, right? But this kind of stuff. So so my computer's is interestingly it's been acting up quite interestingly, and of course I can't work on the computer in front of me because it's not configured properly.
Quick question, Tom.
Yes.
Is this an empty form or is this a web form?
Empty form. We don't want to do well. I created an empty form for a reason, right? Because what I want to do is I want to build it up with you, right? I think this is the way to go, right? So the first thing I'm going to do, again, I'm going to kick off GitHub and connect to it. So I'm going to go, if I go to GitHub, right, for those of you who haven't had me before or it's been a while, I want to create a new repository. I think we want to start there with GitHub, right? So the new repository name is going to be the same as my project name today, which is COMP2007 lesson 3, part 1. I think it's important that we do that. We get this URI, like we talked about last time. I'm going to right-click and copy it. I'm going to need this later on as I move across into Visual Studio. So here I am in Visual Studio, and I got Visual Studio running in the background. I'm hoping not. Let's go back up here. Okay, and what I want to do in Team Explorer, I want to go to Changes, and I want to write something like this: created, Visual Studio web project, basic or base web project, something like that. Just as a start, right? So that's what I first do as a commit. Now this commit that I did, just as a recap, is done locally here on my machine, right? So what I want to do now is when I go to Home and I want to sync this commit, right? I want to go into Home Unsync Commits and put in my URI, which I just got from the web, and click Publish. And when I've done that, of course, I've connected up. Now I'm connected with my GitHub. It's synchronized, so anything I do here, you can see on GitHub as well. Okay, cool. So let's go back into our web application. Isn't that interesting that this is already running for some reason and I didn't see it? That's okay. That would be bad, but I have 2 versions of Visual Studio running at the same time. Okay, so I've got this thing. It's empty. I've got to add a web form. Remember, this is a different project than we work on. Even though it's an ASP.NET project, right? It's blank. It's empty right now, and I want to make it my own. Right? Now there's different ways to start a project. You can start with a web forms application, but a web forms application is going to give you a bunch of additional stuff. It's going to give you master pages and things that we don't need right now. Right? Sorry. Can you sign in, please? So this is what this does. It allows me the latitude to create pages the way we want. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to add, again, I'm going to add in a web form, because we're working with web forms here, right? And I'm going to call this default. Okay, so this is my default web form. What it does is as soon as I do this, it creates the structure that I need for my default ASPX application. On the back end, my code behind file sits right here. It's kind of layered like this. So I have my ASPX file, if you will, my document. And then behind that I have a couple of additional files. One of them is the code behind file. And again, if you notice, the code behind file is listed up here in the top, right? At default ASPX.cs. As to know, we're reviewing again. I also have this at page directive. This is actually a directive. We haven't talked about directives too much yet. But when we see this little code on line 1 that's automatically generated for you, this is a directive. I still use, I have an expression. Again, if you take a look at the expression here, whenever I see less than and percent in ASP.NET, right, it's because it's an expression. And the expression, what it does is it creates, inside the expression, it kind of mentions different attributes. For example, the inherits attribute. It says it inherits from COMP2007 lesson 3 part 1 default, right? That's almost like our namespace, if you will, right? Auto event wire up is true. What does this mean? What would you think auto event wire up means, guys? I'm going to pick guys. Robin, what do you think it means? Auto event wire up is true. What do you think? Even if I didn't tell you what it is, if I'm not training you to tell you what it is, what do you think it is? No problem. I'll go to someone else. Jeremy, what do you think it is? Give a guess. Auto event wire up. What does it mean? Huh? If I double click, this is what it means. If I double click, it wires up my event. Auto event wire up. That's what it means. I could turn this off, right? Which means if I double click on my controls, it won't automatically generate my event in the code behind file, right? Because right now, remember when we talked about regular forms from C#, when you did rapid application development, who did not do rapid application development? I know there's a couple people who may have skipped that. That's like with VB or with C# with Andrew. She might have been hosting that one. I believe it's COMP2004, if I'm not wrong, right? If you didn't do that, then again, there's a bit of disadvantage there because we covered forms, right? Windows forms in that course, right? And Windows forms, web forms, they almost work identically, but we have a couple of additional piece parts, right, to make them link together. And the main part here is it's a web application, so we use web technologies, and so it's not quite a C# application. We have C# pieces on the back end, but on the front end we have this this expression. This is what this is, an ASP.NET expression that we need to kind of decode a little bit for ourselves. Another attribute is our language is C#. You can also specify language VB if you're comfortable with a VB language, right? Visual Basic for the whole Microsoft .NET environment. Then you can certainly code your application with VB. It's equally effective. To me, though, I'm comfortable with C#, and I think it's the language of choice these days for programmers, especially if you want to get into the government, any kind of banks and so on. C# is the way to go. That and Java, those are the two main languages I would say to make the most money these days if you're going to be a programmer. Again, there's others too. JavaScript was definitely it's a good tool skill set to have, but this is what this is. I'm explaining this from scratch because people had issues when we talked about the lab piece, and I want you guys to understand this before we get into more complex stuff, because we're going to ramp up fairly quickly over the next week or so. Okay, so that's the first piece. The next piece is this. I have a doc type of HTML. This is generated, right? And I have an HTML attribute of XMLNS is equal to this. Again, for me, I'd like you in my class to get rid of it and change this to lang. So lang, right? Language is equal to English. I want you to change it to that, please. It complies better with HTML5 standards. Are you with me? Guys, I need you to do this. I don't want you to watch. Do it, please. So when we're in this together, I know we did like last time. For those people who've had me before, you know what I'm going to do next. I'm going to do a couple meta tags, right? Let's do this meta tag stuff now. So the first meta tag in the head argument, I'm going to say meta. I'm going to define my character set is equal to UTF-8. Not US ASCII. Let's try that again. UTF-8. Again, it reduces the amount of errors we get in our console. If we were to look at the console, and it's more compliant with HTML5. Next one. I want to make our site more mobile, compliant, especially more modern web compliant. So I want you to put in another meta tag, right, as an example. And instead of character set is equal to UTF-8, we're going to say name is the attribute is equal to viewport, right, with content is equal to width is equal to device width. Now, if you notice, it's not giving my content IntelliSense. Let's try this again. Content, right, is equal to, and if it doesn't give it to me, why? Because it's not part of what we're doing, but you can still put it in. Width, let's type this in. Width is equal to device-width, comma, initial-scale is equal to 1. And what I'm saying here really is that when we have, for our content, I want to scale our viewport so that it is compliant with the size of my device. So if I have a device that's a smaller device, it's still going to be compliant with that. You guys should remember this kind of stuff from last class. If you were with me in COMP2007, we did advanced web programming. For those of you who didn't have me in that or whatever, it's boo-hoo, but we're going to learn to do things together, right? Who did not take COMP2007, by the way? Get out of here. You took it. Get out of here. Right. You guys didn't take COMP2007. Anyone else not take it in our class here? Or you didn't take it, right? Or maybe you took it with somebody else, right? Because there's also other people that teach the course. Okay, so that's kind of the beginning that we want to kind of do. The next one is we want to kind of put a title in here for our site. So we're going to say, I'm just going to call this COMP2007, and we're just going to name it the lesson 3, part 1. That's important to put in. And we've got a couple of things we missed. Here's in our head of the document, I say, well, you know what? I want to run this stuff on the server. I even have a run at command here, which also tells me here and here in my form, right, that I'm running things on the server. This is server-side scripting I'm doing right now, right, with ASP.NET. These two, if you notice, these commands are here. You need to have those in. Okay, I'm going to add in my code, but I want to make my page responsive. And we talked about responsive frameworks a little bit, because if you don't do responsive frameworks in this day and age, something's wrong, right? Now, it's not covered in the book, but we're going to cover it here together. We're going to cover a little bit of Bootstrap today. And I asked you guys to take a look at that from last day to this day. Do you guys remember? I said, look at Bootstrap, right? Who did that? Who actually looked at the Bootstrap from? Thank God you guys looked at Bootstrap, because we're going to teach Bootstrap in this course, because you need to be able to do things on the front end to make it look pretty. Otherwise, our stuff is going to look ugly as hell, right? If we just follow the book or follow the labs. So let's make it pretty. So what do I do with Bootstrap? First thing I'd like you to do is I want you to go to the Bootstrap. I want you to go to the Bootstrap website. Let's just do that. So I'm going to go to our Bootstrap website. Again, to get there, it's getbootstrap.com. Here it is. Yes?
So do you recommend, because I was working with Stephen Blaine, we downloaded using the manager from Visual Studio, and it worked like Sean.
That's fine. I'd like you to do it manually, though.
Okay.
So you know how to do it. I think the NuGet Manager is a great way of doing it. I think it's a great way of doing it because it kind of puts everything together for you. I want you to know how to do it without. Because tomorrow you might be able to create some other kind of, you might not be in a position to use NuGet Package Manager, let's put it that way, right? Or it may not work the way you want because there's an update or something that hasn't been passed down. Okay, so again, I'm going to download Bootstrap. If I click Download Bootstrap, it's going to take me to this area here where it says I can compile in minified CSS, JavaScript, and fonts. No docs or original source files are included. If I want the source code, I can click this link. Or if I want the Sass files, if I'm going to use Sass and less, and Sass would be another way of doing CSS with mix-ins and variable names and so on, which we're not going to cover in this course, right? Again, it's almost like an advanced CSS. In fact, if anything, we should all be using Sass as opposed to regular CSS these days. And maybe one day CSS will have those properties, and maybe CSS4 will have that additional, the abilities to do mix-ins, almost like functions and layering of different styles and so on. But we don't have that, so for now, let's deal with Bootstrap on its own. Download Bootstrap. You click that button, and it gives you this latest distribution, 3.3.4 dist. I'm going to put this in my downloads for now, right? Here it is. I'm just downloading Bootstrap, and so I'm doing it with you as if I were doing it for the first time. I'm going to unzip this source. So let's just go back to local downloads. And I'm going to unzip it with you. So I'm going to say 7-zip. I'm using 7-zip. I'm extracting it to Bootstrap. There it is. I'm double clicking on it. And inside the Bootstrap distribution, I have this CSS, fonts, and JS folder, right? Now, this is neat. And remember, we have to do kind of the same thing that I'm doing with CSS, fonts, and JS. Again, this is all part of my setup for my web forms. I want you to get into the flow of doing this from the get-go. In fact, maybe what you want to do, we talked about templating, is create your own little template as opposed to use the template that comes from Visual Studio because it does all this for you, so you don't have to do it over and over again, right? And I'll show you how to do that today. So I need to have a CSS file with some of this stuff in there, not all of it. I need to have a fonts folder and so on with these glyph icons. I need to have a JavaScript section with Bootstrap and Bootstrap Min. I also need for Bootstrap jQuery because Bootstrap doesn't work without jQuery. You need to have that working. So I need to set up that as well, and I need to do that in Visual Studio. So again, how do I do that? My recommendation is you right-click on your project, go to Add, go to New Folder, right? And then from there, add in, the first thing that I would add in, of course, is CSS. Now, here's the difference. I kind of talked about this at the beginning. If I put in CSS and I don't make it a web forms or ASP.NET folder, is it the right thing I should do? And my answer to you is probably not. Because if you make it an ASP.NET folder, there's additional markup that happens on the back end that helps you connect things properly and won't give you less errors. So this is incorrect. This is the way I just did it. Let's do it the correct way. So I'm going to get rid of it for a second. Actually, I would say it's not incorrect. It's more work doing it my way. And I'm a lazy guy, right? So I want to make it as less work for me as possible when I program. I want to do rapid application development, right? So that's why I use what I do, right? So I go right-click. Instead of adding a regular folder now, I'm going to go add in an ASP.NET folder. And if you notice, there's a few options here: theme, browsers, data, pick whatever, right? Add app code, right, for now. We're going to rename it anyway. We're going to go here to rename. We're going to name this CSS. Again, the advantage is I got this back-end additional wiring up that happens that you don't get normally. Okay, do the same thing. So right-click, add ASP.NET folder. Instead of app code, I'm going to rename this thing again to scripts. Right? I like scripts because that's what Microsoft likes. Oh, by the way, CSS, is that the right name for ASP.NET? It's content, right? So maybe a right-click, rename, content is what it should be. Content and scripts. Now, one I like to add in, which I don't care what they name it, is assets. Now, you could also put it under the content. Some people put it under content assets. I like to put it under its own, right? So right-click, I'm going to go a new ASP.NET folder, and I'm just going to rename this thing to assets. Now, just in line with how Microsoft does it, I'm going to make it a capital A, assets. Now that I've got that inside there in my assets, just to scaffold things out the right way, I'm going to add a new folder, regular folder now, because I'm inside ASP.NET. I'm good. I'm going to make this images. I'm going to have to add that in, right? Add new folder. And maybe if I'm going to have audio or something like that, I'm going to put it in here. I probably won't have an audio right now for our little project, but I'll put it in there. I'm scaffolding it out. And I like to use fonts. I like to put my fonts inside my assets, right? Folder. Okay, and we'll talk about, there's advantages and disadvantages to doing this. Okay, in my content, that's where I'm going to put all my CSS. In my scripts, this is where I need to create a library section, or lib section, a lib folder. So I'm going to put lib. That's all my libraries going to be in there. And all my other scripts outside of, for JavaScript, are going to be living in there as well. Probably won't need a JavaScript file because I'm using ASP.NET, and we're going to use the code behind files, the C# files, to do most of our interactivity. Right? But we do need JavaScript for some of our client-side responsive design that we're going to be doing right now. All right? Okay, so I've got kind of an infrastructure or a folder structure I'd like to use. And now I've got most piece parts. There's still some pieces I'm missing, but I'm going to drag and drop this bootstrap.min.js, and it's going to go inside my lib folder. Right? Because that's where it should live from a folder structure perspective. Go back out. These fonts, if you notice, EOT, SVG, and so on, I'll put them in right now. They normally would sit next to my CSS folder, and the reason for that is this is where these special fonts are fonts for Bootstrap. So my recommendation, and this is kind of funny, is to actually drag and drop this thing into the same area where your CSS is going to live, right? Which is going to be in your content, right? But for now, we're going to do some modifications. Just copy all this stuff out of here, right? And you can copy and paste or drag and drop, right, into your fonts folder. All right, cool. So we got our fonts, and we'll see how we're going to use those in a bit. We're going to go back out. In our CSS, we have a couple of things I'd like you to drag and drop in here. I have bootstrap.css, which is the unminified version. I have bootstrap.css.map. I have min.css. I have theme.css and theme.min.css. So I want the minified versions, obviously. The map files, again, I could live with them or without them. I don't really need them right now. For now, let's just drag and drop this bootstrap-theme.min.css, because I may need the theme version of my files, as well as my minified version of the bootstrap.css, which is right here, these two files. Now I'm doing it manually. If you do it through NuGet Package Manager, it does it automatically and does it in a different format than I do, right? And of course I dragged in the wrong folder. I meant to do it up here. That's good. It's okay. You should say it. Say it. If you see it, say it, right? Okay, so I've got my basics. I do need jQuery, right? I do need a jQuery version, even though it doesn't give it to you with when you go up on Get Bootstrap. You need jQuery when we start things off. When we go to getting started, and I'm just going to go down here to show you that you can't start off Bootstrap without jQuery. Now, there's a couple ways to do that. You could have a local jQuery file, or you could link to the CDN, Content Delivery Network, right? In a deployment perspective, from a production environment perspective, you'd want to link to a CDN. It makes more sense because you want your clients to cache your files and so on. So if they're accessing the same version of jQuery as you and so on, it's browser time loading is faster. For us, I'd like to kind of do it locally with us. So let's just do it manually. So I'm going to go into the jQuery website, right? And if you notice, there's the download 1.11.3, right? Or 2.1.4. The later versions, 2.1.4, will also work with Bootstrap. The challenge is that it will not be backwards compatible with older browsers. Now, do I really care about older browsers? The answer is no, right? So it doesn't matter to me which version you download. I'm going to download the later version and see if it works. I'm going to go to download jQuery, and again, I'm going to go to jQuery2.x. I'm going to download the compressed production version of jQuery because I don't care to be a developer for jQuery at this time, and kind of download this. And if you notice, it's going to download this right into my downloads. I'm okay with that. I'm going to put that into my Bootstrap folder just in case I want to do, I want to use this again from scratch, which I may with you. I'm going to put that in there so I don't have to do it again. Okay, cool. So I've got that. I'm going to go back into my distribution folder. Oops. All right. I love when that happens. I'm going to go back into my distribution for jQuery. In my downloads, in my Bootstrap, right, I'm going to go into my JS, and I'm going to drag and drop this jQuery 2.1.4.min.js into my lib folder. All right. So I got all the structure I need. Now I got to set up Bootstrap, and it's got to be, again, if you look at some older manuals and so on, if you haven't kept up, you're going to see all the jQuery stuff or the JavaScript stuff in the head of your document. For those people who weren't with me before, I recommend not to do that, right? So what we do need in the head of the document is our CSS, and I'm going to drag and drop both of those in. So the first thing in order, first my bootstrap.min.css, that one, right? As well as my bootstrap.theme.min.css after that one. Right, the theme one just gives you additional themes, so you can theme out your Bootstrap a little better, right? On the bottom, underneath the form of your document, right, we're going to do some documentation best practice here, and I'm going to say this is my JavaScript section. There we go. And I can do the same thing for this part here if I want to be nice. I can kind of, this is my CSS section. Right? If I can actually spell section without making a mistake today, it'd be nice. And then underneath my JavaScript section, I want to kind of drag and drop first my jQuery, right? That's the first thing. jQuery is required for Bootstrap, so Bootstrap has to have jQuery loaded first in order for it to function, right? Then my Bootstrap underneath that, right? There it is. There's Bootstrap. So I've got those two piece parts in there. Okay, make sense? So jQuery first, then Bootstrap. Okay, and in here, inside my form, now I can actually put additional information and tags so I can take advantage of the jQuery, the Bootstrap stuff. Now, let's go back to the Bootstrap website. So I'm going to just kill this. I'm going to go back to get Bootstrap, but at the top, there's this area that I want you to go to, which is CSS. CSS, right? And if I look here, it talks about the same stuff we did already. Here's our doc type HTML, right, with language is English. This is important, especially for SEO and stuff. Our viewport, look, here's our stuff we already did, right? I took care of that. There's another one where they also suggest, use with caution, user scalable is equal to no. User scalable means you can't pinch and zoom on your mobile device. That's what it means, right? So sometimes it's good to use this, sometimes it's not. I'm going to leave mine out for now. Typography and links. Bootstrap sets global display typography and links like this, right? With @font family and so on. Normalize.css. This is actually built in. Normally we'd use reset.css or normalize.css. If we did foundation together, we would use a normalize or reset. We don't need to do this in Bootstrap because it's included. They normalize first and then they add their own CSS on top of it. So this is a good thing. Here's one thing we do need to use. Everything in Bootstrap should be surrounded with a container. object, a container object. So let's do that. So let's add a div class container into our file here. So again, around it's going to surround our form, right? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say div. This is the shorthand with a class dot of container, and then tab. See that? I'm using Zen coding here for those people who forgot. Zen coding is included in Visual Studio Web Essentials for update 4. For if you haven't downloaded that, install that in your version of Visual Studio, your IDE. That's how I was able to come up with that shorthand. I'm going to drag and drop this stuff into here. I'm going to just be messy about it. And remember, Stephen, who remembers, see you're yawning, who remembers how to do a format? How do I format this thing so the document looks nice?
Control A to select it all.
Control A, and then right click.
And then format selection.
Format selection. This is important to do because that way, for us, it formats everything nicely so that we're not confused. That's what it does when we don't format. Now, even though we have the form document, this is the form section here. If I want to use an H1 tag that kind of says, you know, hello world, or this is our first form, whatever you want to call it, login form. So here I'm going to do an H1 document, right? H1 tag, take a look, right? If I tab my H1 tag, it gives me the opening and closing tags, which I need. I don't have to type in H1 or less than H1. I don't have to do that, yeah.
Are we going to make this before we continue adding stuff, template? So we can...
Not yet. First, I'm going to make some basics. I'm going to add an H1 tag with maybe a hello world, and you can change it afterwards. And then, so we can see hello world where it's going to be positioned. I can show you the Bootstrap stuff, and then we'll make it a template. Okay, because this is all going to change, right? So here's my H1 tag. We're going to say this. We're going to call this. This is our hello world, which is going to be. We're going to say kind of a default page. So we're going to call this a ASP.NET page with in all caps for a reason. Right? That's our H1 tag. It's inside of my container class right now, right? And I'm going to kind of save everything. Now, if I run this thing, there's two ways to debug. And if in the book, if you look, if I go debug, when my Visual Studio complies, if I go debug, I can do two things. I can start debugging with F5, and we did that before in our previous class, or we can Control 5 and start without debugging. What's the advantage of starting without debugging? Why would I do that? Correct. But debugging for us, the reason why we want debugging is because we want to be able to get feedback so that we know the code behind pages are working, we know the JavaScript is working, all that stuff. So we will always want to start with F5 or start debugging. All right, just as a recap. So we're going to click, you know, this button here to make sure where we're at. Now, if Brown Sugar, if you're getting all kinds of errors, take a look at this ASP.NET page. This is the Bootstrap font that we're getting here, right? Let me also take a look at, if I go to the hamburger or the sandwich here on the top right corner, I'm using Chrome, and I go back to more tools, and I go back to JavaScript console, which you can also get with Control-Shift-J, right? I position my JavaScript console on the bottom. If I refresh here, I get a bit of an error. But if I refresh here, it says the key initial scale is not recognized and ignored, right? I want to point this out because, again, it's a warning that I'm getting from my my browser. Does it mean that I misspelled something here in my meta tag? Here's my meta tag, UTF-8. My name is equal to viewport content is equal to width equals device width initial scale 1, right? And if I go back to Bootstrap, just to make sure that I've done it correctly, you can always see these kind of things. So here's initial scale 1. Everything's the same. If you don't believe it, you can always copy, right? I do the same thing all the time. And just in case you've made an error, I'm just going to kind of stop debugging. I'm also going to unhide or auto-hide this form so I can see it bigger. If I was just going to, I'm just going to kind of paste it underneath to show you the difference. Is there a difference? It seems that there is. This one has a backslash, but that's the only difference. Was that?
You're missing an I initial.
That's the problem. Right? So I'm going to, I'm definitely going to put that in because that's definitely an error that I want to fix. Kill this one. Right? I'm going to run it again. I don't want errors in my template, right? That would be bad because then it's going to carry every time I do a template. my page, it's going to be messed. I don't want a messed up page. So I'm going to go More Tools, JavaScript Console, and now I got no errors. This is good. You should have no errors too on the bottom. And my ASP.NET page is here, right? This ASP.NET page is just a default something that I'm putting in here, you know, as a default control. I also, you know what? Since we're making some kind of ASP.NET page, I should probably put a control in there to show you what Bootstrap can do. So I think we should put a couple of things: a label, perhaps. In addition to a label, probably some kind of input and so on, and maybe a button. So maybe like name, like just like we did last time. You know, your name, you know, username, password kind of combination. Let's try and do that, and we'll have that as our template. We can always erase it from our template afterwards. It's easier to remove things than to add them, and I think username and password might just be a good way of setting up our Bootstrap so it works properly, right? So again, if I was going to add it in here, I'm going to stop debugging, and I want to use this drag and drop feature that we have in that we use with ASP.NET, right? So I'm going to kind of go enter in here. So I'm going to put it in here inside my div tag, and if I go to Toolbox, that's the first thing I want to set up. These are my standard controls right here, and I want to drag and drop a couple of things. I want to drag and drop a label, right? So I'm dragging it here, right? If I go to the design side for a second, here's my design side. We talked about this. It's more challenging to drag and drop it here, only because what's happening is you can drop it in the wrong place and it might create another paragraph tag or something in there. I recommend you do it here in your source code. I think the design side is great to give you a preview of what the page is going to look like with all the tags and everything else. But I don't recommend from the get-go that you drag and drop unless it's very clear where you're dragging and dropping into. And again, that might be different from what the book tells you. So that's one control I've got in there. And I also want to drag in another control, which is a text box. So I've got text box control. There it is. And obviously my label ID, I'm going to redo that. There's a couple ways to do that. What are the two ways to kind of reset or rename my ID for my label? There's two ways to do it. Yes, Jean-Claude? I could do it in line there. What's the other way? Cody? Huh? In the class? No. Give it a class? No. Properties panel. So where's the properties panel? Well, it's hidden right now because I've got it over here. I'm just going to minimize. I'm going to hide this one and open this one so you guys can see maximum view. I'm going to kind of pin this one here, and depending on which one I'm clicking on, it gives me a different context. Again, this is just review from what we did last week, okay, and the week before, because this is all new to some of you. Okay, so if I'm clicking on the label, I have my ID here. I could simply change this label ID to something else, and this would be something like, you know, username label. So I could make it username label. It'll take it. Oh, if I can actually type properly today. It's one of my problems today for some reason. All right, so that's one thing, my username label. And I want to change my text value. I can do it two places: here within my text attribute inline, or here within my properties tag if you want to be special, and do it here and kind of type in username. So username. Right, username, and if that's no good, you can always separate it. Username, if it doesn't like it. And if you notice, it automatically changes here on the left side. Which is, I think the property panel is a great little panel for a couple of reasons. One is it gives you all the properties that you may or may not know for each of your controls. Remember, you're using controls that are packed with functionality, and you know, it's not like using regular HTML5 and CSS and other controls you're making. These are ASP.NET controls, server controls is what we're talking about today, that are packed with additional properties, right? So these are all the different kind of properties right now. Okay, same thing with the text box. Let's do the same thing. So I'm going to go up to the top for the text box itself. Oops, if I can actually go properly. And rename this text box. I'm going to give it a contextual name. So it's going to be the username text box. And I don't care how long it is, because I can access it. I'll know what it is later on, username text box. And I don't need to give it any default text, but I could, right? How do I give this kind of a default value here? What do I put in here? And what kind of text mode do I want? What do I want to enter for my username? This is going back to properties again. So remember, I've got a bunch of properties here on the right-hand side, right? So one of the things is, if you notice on the right, it says, here's some text, right? What does this text do? Well, it's default text. So like something like enter your username. If I put that in, right, that's going to go in there as a text value, right? Almost like almost like pre-built, right? Our text mode is single line. If I go drag and drop here, there's different options. Single line, password, phone, search, whatever, all these different things. I think single line in this particular case is good because you're just getting a username, right? But there's different options here, and it's HTML5 compliant. So if you want to specify email, it'll only bring up, especially on a device, it'll bring up only the keyboard with an email, right? It'll stop you from doing certain things. So this is really good. This is good to filter this and add in different text mode. Same thing with our, so now we've got our two things, our text label and text box. Let's check it, what it looks like in our design side. So there's our label and text box, username, and then enter your username. And I want to make this bigger, so I want to make it comply with my sizes. For now, though, I want to use Bootstrap to do it for me. I want Bootstrap to style it. I don't want to style it on my own unless I really have to. And I can always add my main.css, my custom style sheet afterwards, which I'm going to need to do if this is our template, right? So how do I custom style this for Bootstrap? So I'm going to go back to Bootstrap, and I'm in the CSS piece, and I want to look at forms. If I go to forms on the right-hand side here, take a look, and I go down, I see a bunch of different options. One of them is there's a div class that shows form group, right? That's inside of the form. Well, I have that, right? I have a div. I'm going to go back to the source code here. I have a div that's in here, and here's my div right here, right? I can use this div to give it a class of form group. Okay, the class I'm giving it, how do I give it a class of form group? Do I have to, because it's not run at server, right? If I have run at server in the same line as an element, I have to specify CSS class. Because it's not run at server and there's no ASP.NET control, I can just say a CSS or class, right? So class. So here's my class, and is equal to, and again, remember this is form group, right? And take a look, it's pulling up these options because it's seeing the CSS and everything else that are built into Bootstrap in the theming. So form group is the first thing I got to put in there. The other thing I want to do, so I've got my form group in here. I'm just going to make this a little bigger for you guys so you can see it. So only at 100%. Some people like seeing it bigger. Some people don't. That didn't work. That's okay. We're going to be more flexible, right? Here it is. So form group, you have to surround things with form group. An example is this: our label, right, is good. Our input has its own class, form control. But we know our input for form control is a text box, right? We want to put the form control styling on the text box. If we want to put it on the label, we can do that as well, right? But our real important thing here is our styling for our text box. Now we know this class would work nicely if it was a regular HTML5. This is not regular HTML5. We need to say CSS class in this particular case, which is form-control. So let's go back in here and show you what I mean. So here's my my label. We're not going to touch that. But in here, we're going to say, I'm just going to minimize or just get rid of this for now. And it can go anywhere in here. I'm going to say CSS class, there it is, right? And it equals to form-control. And I'm doing that because I can't say class because they'll think that I mean class is in a C# class, and I don't want a C# class on my code behind file. I'm accessing the CSS class to give me styling. All right, I'm going to save this. Let's go back and see what the design side shows me, right? Well, the design side showed me something different than before, right? I had my username here, and it says enter my username down here, right? And how does this look from when I run this page, right? Let's take a look. Well, this is what it does because it automatically gives me the page that I have. Now, if you notice also, when I click in here, it doesn't highlight my text. I'd like it to highlight my text, right? So I'm going to put some stuff in the code behind file in a second so that whenever I click in here, it's automatically highlighting my text. So when I start typing, it removes my text. All right. So when I click in here for the first time, right, I make it active. Think about the event that I'm creating. right? I'm creating an event. I'm using an event listener to listen to my text, make it active. The other thing is this. This is all fine and great, right? But there's some other classes we're going to use for Bootstrap, so that way we can assign a certain amount of columns to this thing. Because right now, even though I might want it to be responsive, if I kind of crush this down, right, all it does is it changes the size of my my text box so that it resizes to my screen. See? Make it bigger, the text box gets bigger, right? Make it smaller, the text box gets, that's Bootstrap working for you, right? That's good, that's Bootstrap working. Also the styling, so when I'm clicked onto it, this highlight that's happening right here, that's all Bootstrap theming built in, right? It makes our stuff we almost look like superheroes, right? When it comes to CSS, right? We want to be superheroes, even we're developers, we want to be superheroes when it comes to CSS. That's why we use Bootstrap, right? Okay, cool. There's still something else we need to use in here. And I recommend we kind of break it up. We're going to talk about, kind of breaking up our columns and rows and all that stuff in a second. So let's leave it like this for now. This is okay. I want to also do a password and then a button, all right? Those are the two pieces that I'm missing. So let's add that in before we stop this video. I'm going to go back in the source code. I'm going to stop debugging. I'm going to make sure this is all clicked down. I want to do the same thing, but I'm going to be lazy. Lazy. I'm going to take these two things here. I'm going to Control C and I'm going to Control V, right? So I'm going to copy and paste them both. And this is what happens. Look, label changes from username label to label 1, and then but it retains the styling for form control. This is good, right? And my username text box, well, this is going to be my password text box, right? So I'm going to do it inline this time. So password text box. I'm renaming the ID here. Right? Let's do that together, guys, for those of you people who are not doing it. Our label 1 is going to be our password label, right? Password label. And our text for it will be, of course, password, right? I have a, instead of you enter your username, right, we're going to say enter your password. We're going to get back to this in a second. Enter your password, right? And I want to go into my properties, Again, let's say I can't remember. I know it's password text box, but my text mode right now is single line from my password text box. And by the way, it shows me what it is up here, password text box, right? I don't want it to be single line. I want it to be password, right? So that it gives me those dots. Password, right? Text mode is password. All right, that's all the changes I want right now, right? I want to look in the design side, see what I get. Well, this is what I'm getting, right? But take a look. I don't have that default text, enter your password. I wonder why that is. Well, it's because I've changed my text mode. Let's try this out and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So enter your username. I start typing my password, I get, dots automatically. Okay, just sign in. Where's your partner? Where's Kata?
I don't know.
Ah. So those are the two things that are happening. They're automatically happening. So we're getting styling again from two sections. One, the ASP.NET is giving us some changes in user controls, right, or the form control. And the second piece is that Bootstrap is styling it for us and putting it in this way. You should get the same thing. Who's not getting this? Please put up your hand now, because then you're not doing your Bootstrap properly. All right. This is like Bootstrap 101, right? Okay, cool. So we need this. Let's go back to here. I'm going to go back into source. I'm going to stop debugging, right? I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to unpin it, right? I'm going to go back over here. I do want to add in a button, right? So I'm going to put it inside my div. There he is. I'm going to put in a button in here. I'm going to pull up my toolbox, and I'm going to drag and drop in my button. That's what I want to do. Here's my button control. I'm going to drag and drop this in here, right? Well, this is nice, but I want to style it with Bootstrap, right? So the way I'm going to do that, of course, is I'm going to go into my Bootstrap CSS again. So I'm going to go to CSS Bootstrap, and I want to find different kinds of things here. If you notice, these are my standard controls. Here's my submit button, and if you notice, this is just the example of what the submit button will look like. Button type is submit class. Here's another class here. Oh boy. Button dash default. So there's two classes being used here, button and button dash default. I want to use this class and I don't want to type it, so I want to take the text from this class. I definitely want this, so I don't want to remember that, right? And I want to go back into my Visual Studio, and now I got to do the same thing. I got to put in here a space CSS class, if I can type in properly, is equal to, right? And I'm going to just Control V for my button default. Okay, cool. That's the styling, right? I'm just going to get rid of this for a second now. That's the styling for my button, but I want it to be called my submit button because that's the kind of guy that I am. I'm just doing an inline again. Submit button, and where it says button, the text is going to be submit or login. Maybe a login button because that's what it really is. I'm sorry, login button. Same diff. Okay, again, this is just, we're making a template. I'm just giving you an example of how to use Bootstrap in your template, right? Okay, so that's what we've done so far. Let's see how this works. So I'm going to just run it again. And if everything goes well, I have a button with some styling, login, right? Come from Bootstrap. If I click this my login button, it tries to access the server already because it's an ASP.NET control that runs on the server side, right? Okay, I don't have any functionality. My username and my password, if you notice, my username doesn't go away when I kind of click in here. I got to fix that. I got to fix my button. And you know what? I want my button to be blue. Blue button, right? Well, guess what? Bootstrap has some basic custom theming, which we're going to go into. And one of the options, instead of default, you can call it primary, right? So if I say button default, if I change to button primary, it'll give me a blue styling for my button. Let's just stop debugging for a second and just change that up. So I'm going to say button dash primary. If I do right here, and if I check it on the design side, I see that suddenly it's a blue button, right? Because the styling has been changed to show a preview of what here. So instead of me running it, this is what it looks like. This is good. This is a good thing, right? Okay, so we've got our styling. I want to do something else. I want to say that, you know what? I don't want my controls, all of my controls, to take up the entire length of my page, right? I want them to be in a panel or some kind of thing like that to kind of, you know, highlight what they're like. Well, again, let's go back to Bootstrap. We're looking at CSS, and there's some things here. The grid system is kind of the basics of all Bootstrap stuff, and they use a container. Container is kind of the outside, but what you need to use is almost like this row. You can use grid classes like row, and it says column extra small 4 or large. We kind of did this with before. If you took another class with me, we did, you know, foundations, very similar to Bootstrap. If you haven't, it's okay because this is what we can do. We have 4 different sizes. These are breakpoints for different types of devices, right? So we can say this. We can say for desktops, it's medium. I'm going to use column dash mid, MD dash, and whatever, how many columns I want, right? I'm using a 12, you know, a 12 column grid, right? So I can cut up my page into these 12 columns and assign a certain number of columns for each of the controls, right? So an example, if I want my controls, my login page, as an example, to only have 6 columns, right? And they're on the medium page, as an example. And if I want them to have 12 columns, all columns, on the small size screen, and on the large size devices, I don't want them to be limited, right? I could simply put I can add it in these classes depending on what I want from a column perspective like this. So there's my class, column, dash, mid, and so on. And they're going to give you some examples down here. If you actually go to examples, here's some examples of how you can add these classes in. You surround them by div tags, right? And you say something like this, column dash mid, middle, one column, right? Column dash, and you have to put this, you have to surround an outer div with a row. That's the row basically tells that this row of controls only has this many columns, as an example. And remember that each row has to add up to 12 columns. So if you notice, there's 12 different ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 12. Here, this row here adds up to 12 because you have one section that takes up 8 columns, and the other section that takes up 4 columns. 8 and 4 is equal to 12, right? Every time when you do columns, they have to add up to 12 to meet the 12 column grid requirement, right? Okay. 6 and 6, 4, 4, 4, these are all 12s, right? So this is what I need to do when I create my, my kind of styling here in my page. Okay, so I've got my container, which is here. I've got my div class, which is a form group. But here in my form, if I want my form to only have 6 columns, right, I need to do a couple things. So let's do this up here. Now we'll change it up here. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say div, right, dot for class, right, row. That's the first thing I'm going to do, right? So I've got my row is the outer class, the outer container for my bootstrap row, right? Inside there, I've got to put this. I got to say, well, I want my columns to be only 6 columns, right? So div, right, as an example, and then I want it to be going back to this. Let's use the same format. Call dash mid or md dash 6. Okay, cool. Let's try that. So call dash md dash 6. So what I'm saying is 6 columns I want to take up with this particular div in this row. Okay, cool. So I want my whole form to only have 6 columns. Let's try that out. So I'm going to take this whole form, I'm going to cut it, and put it inside this div right here. I'm going to just because I know Steve doesn't like it when I'm disorganized, I'm going to format my text again, right? Just to make it nice. I know Steve appreciates it because he's fine. He won't get mad at me anymore, right? Or Robin and Steve, they get mad when I'm disorganized, right? So that's just the way it is, right? Okay, so now there's a bunch of div tags, and you know what? We're going to get into this a little bit more. We're talking about design here, right? But it doesn't matter whether you're doing ASP.NET for enterprise computing or something else. We've got a bunch of div tags, and I need to take care of these div tags. One of them is this. I'd like you to put some comments in the div tag. So do one of these. So bam, dash dash. Here's my comment, and my comment is going to be kind of like end form. So I know this is the div tag for my form, right? And you know, because my form group, this I'm going to kind of specify my classes here, form group, right? And this div tag here, if you notice, is for my column mid 6. So I'm going to say the same kind of idea. So bang, end, call dash mid dash 6, right? Okay. And this div tag is for my row, right? Because there's a lot of div tags, right? You're going to get confused pretty soon. Right, end row, right, and this div tag way out here is for my container. Okay, so a bunch of different div tags, but all I'm doing is I'm specifying which one's which because now I've got one column of 6, but what about my other column? I need another column of 6 to match up for those 12 rows. Well, let's see what we have right here. If I save everything right now, and if I go into my design side, I've got this, right? That's what I'm looking at right now. It looks like exactly like we had before. There's no difference. Why? Well, I'll show you why. This is what I see here. Is there a difference? Yeah, man. There's a difference. Even though I don't use the other 6 columns, I'm limiting myself on the mid-sized screens to only 6 columns. I've actually styled my page by marking it up without actually creating my own styles. And that's the power of Bootstrap, my friends, right? If I want to put more text next to my ASP.NET page, my username and login, like maybe some instruction text, like please log in order for you to blah, 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 access the system, right? We can do that. Let's try this out, and we'll put it right here next to it. Let's see how this works, right? I'm going to go back into source. I'm going to stop debugging. I'm going to go in here, right? And if you notice, I've got column mid 6. I need to do another one of the same kind of idea here. We're going to use another div tag. So div tag with a class of call dash middle dash 6, right? And inside there, I want to put in, look at the greater than sign. Here's my shorthand. Inside there, I want to put a paragraph tag, right? Right. That's what I can do, and it just does it automatically for me instead of me typing it manually. It does my paragraph tag for me automatically, automagically, if you will, right? And I'm going to say, please log in to access the system, right? Okay. I'm going to save that. And if I go to my design side, right, it shows that I've got it like this is where the design side fails, right? If you notice on the left-hand side here, it shows that this is one on top of the other with a paragraph tag down here. However, when I run it, Bootstrap kicks off, and I see this, right? Because I'm taking up 12 columns now, guys, right? And girls. I've got 6 columns allocated to my form, and I've got 6 columns I've allocated to my instructions, right? Again, you can format things the way you like. I don't have to do things like display block. I don't have to put things in like float right or float left. I don't have to do any of these kind of CSS commands. They're built into Bootstrap, and it does all the styling for you. It makes it nice. We're going to go more into this stuff. I can't cover Bootstrap in 1 hour, which we're going to go into it more as we go forward. So we'll learn more about Bootstrap as we go to make your stuff look nice. Okay, let's go back to do a couple things. We still need a couple things before we create our first template. One thing we do need is I want to make sure that when I click on my enter my username, even if I click here or here, it highlights my text. It highlights it, selects it all, right? So I want to make it so I create a some kind of event. What would be the event so that when I click in, right? I could do the click event, right? So I click in there. I'm not changing anything, right? I'm just clicking in there, and I want everything to be highlighted, right? So it's a very simple event. So let's go back. We're going to do this in on this page here. This is where the design side comes in really handy to me, right? Because here we can click on different controls to create our event handler on the code behind files, right? So here I am and enter your username. If I double click, right, it creates this first event. Username text box text changed event, right? Now that's fine. Text change event or click, it doesn't matter. This is the default event. I could always change it to something else. Let's use the text change event. So when I change the text, I want it to be highlighted. Whoa, that's not right. I want it to be the click event, right? What happens if I was to delete this? Is this good that I should delete this thing? It'll get really angry at me, right? I don't want this I don't want to do that. I want to do that at all, right? How do I fix this? Because I've kind of messed up now, right? Well, I could undo, right? Or I could go to properties, right? Which is I recommend you doing, right? Let me pin my properties here. And if you notice, there's a couple of options here on the top. One of them is this properties option. The other one is this event option, right? This is where I want to kill this, guys, right? If you notice, my text change event is one of the only other things I can do with my enter, right? Okay, so my question to you is, do we want to do a text change event? I'm going to just kill this by erasing this thing right here. This is what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to erase it and click away. When I erase it, and if I go back to the code behind page, right, it's still there, but now I can safely get rid of this without complaining. Okay, so this is not what I want, right? I don't want that. I want to be able to click into the control, right, and do that. However, and on the form, a regular Windows form page, it allows me to do that, right? We're not doing regular Windows forms, right? If I go back to here and go to source, and I'm clicking on this, and I want to get properties, right? These are the only built-in events that I have access to. Data binding, dispose, init, load, pre-render, and text change or unload. My problem with text change is every time the text is changed, it's highlighted, right? So that's kind of weird that I will do that. So there's some other kinds of events that I want to add in there that would be nice to have. Or I take this thing out. We can try this out. The other one is my button. So we can take care of our button first. So let's go back into my design side, right? And when I double click on my button, when I click my button, I want to put some information down here, or maybe inside this paragraph tag in here, right? Where I kind of say, thank you for logging in or something like that, or your login has been accepted for now, because it's just a template, right? I don't want to do anything. I don't actually log in. There's no system to log into, right? but I want to be able to show that my login worked, and whatever I put in here and here kind of carries forward, like almost like your lab, right? Hint, hint of the stuff I'm showing you how to do, right? So I want to double click on this login button. Here I am. Now this click event is definitely something I want, this click event, right? Okay, let's check it out on the other side. If I go to default.aspx, and I go if I highlight the login button, if you notice there is a click event that's available. Click, command, data binding, disposed, init, load, blah, 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 right? Here, I definitely want to put some stuff in. I want to do a couple things. I want to clear up my boxes so they're clear, right? I want to clear this up, and then I definitely want to put some kind of message somewhere else. Well, I don't have a container for the message yet, so I need to put that in. So what I'm going to do, just for our example, is down here in our other column, right? Here's our other column. I don't have a form control in here, right? Could I still, just questioning, you guys, see, I want you to tell me what I can do. Do you think you can still use some kind of data binding control that's in there without surrounding with the form? Okay, let's check this out. So what I want to do is say this, please log into the system, right? And there's a couple ways I can do this. I can say, what if I put this paragraph tag, I'm just saying, right? And I choose run at is equal to server, right? First of all, will it change anything on this side? So if I run at server, does it change anything when I kind of run this thing? No, right? Everything looks the same. Let's check out our errors to see if we're getting any errors, right? JavaScript console. No, this is good. This is good. We're good still. All right, cool. Let's stop. So I know I can run this stuff at the server. I need to do this run at server stuff if I'm going to put in any kind of data binding at all, right? I know this. Okay, cool. So I want to change my paragraph tag. What if, just saying, what if I gave my paragraph tag an ID? I could do that and target my ID with CSS or some kind of other thing. I could do that. Or I could create a label, which is probably the easiest way to do it. So here's, I'm going to go into my toolbox, and I'm going to pin my toolbox on. I'm just going to unpin this one for just a second so you guys can have more room to see. And what I want to do is drag and drop a label in here, right? Now I could do this, but I'm not using a form control. Will this still work, right? Well, let's try this. So here's my label, right? There's no form control. It's just a server. I'm running at the server, but there's no form. And my label, I want my label to say, please log in to access the system, right? So I'm going to kind of cut this out. And I'm going to put this inside my label text, right? And then maybe my label ID will be instruction label or feedback label, call it whatever you want. Here's my label. Okay, cool. Let's see if it runs now. I think this is, I made one change at a time, and then see if it runs. Yeah, it's running fine. Refresh just to make sure. I go back down here, more tools, JavaScript console, no errors. So I don't got errors on the JavaScript side. I don't have errors on the ASP.NET side. So far, so good, right? Okay, cool. Now, what I wanted to do is, when I click my button, I want my instruction label to change to say, thank you for logging in. All right, so how do I do that on the code behind file? So I go to my button. So here, so I'm thank you for that, Cody. Now what do I do? I gotta change it, right? So let's see. Can I see my control? That's the first thing, right? Instructions label. Yeah. Dot. Okay. Dot text. Thank you for logging in. All right, let's see if this thing works, right? Because that might be an issue if I can't remember. I'm outside of a form. Can I still have, first of all, can I have multiple forms in a document, A? And two, if I don't want to use another form, if I just want to use a server control without a form, can I still do so, right? Okay, so let's just Control S. Okay, these are some of the questions I had back. Okay, so when I log in, it does this. One of the things I want to check. Let's try this out. So I'm going to run this thing. And I don't care if I have any, I'm not doing any validation right now. I'm just going to click login, and then it changes. Right? So this works nice. That's the first thing, right? So I'm getting some feedback from the server into my form control without needing a form, which is good. That's I don't want to always use a form if I don't need it. Okay, that's the first thing. Next piece. I want to clear, when I click this login button, I want to clear my login imp text box and my password text box. I want to clear those out. Yeah.
So you can go password text box dot text null.
I could do that.
And yeah, you can send it to a password text box. Or you can set it to dot text equals and then just have it as an empty open close bracket.
Okay, let's try this. So login text box. Oh, login text layer. Sorry, I think it's username text layer. So username text box. Oops, not your label text box. I'm just being lazy. Username text box dot text. You're saying, right? Can I do dot clear? No.
No, dot text.
Dot text. Right?
And then set it to null.
Null. I could do that. I recommend you do this though.
Just that, yeah.
Yeah, that's better. And password text box dot text, right? Let's do that is equal to the same. And you know what? It might be a good idea to disable them too. If you're logged in, you shouldn't be able to log in again, right? At least not in this page. So just for our example, we'll disable the control. So we'll say in the same line, username text box. I'm playing, guys, but I want you to understand that's why I'm saying enabled, right, is equal to false, right? And the same thing goes with password text box dot enabled is equal to false. So I disable them, right? So as soon as I click on this box, I disable there's these boxes and I print this out. So good feedback, good example of how we did this before, right? So let's try this out. First, let's run this. Right, so I've got my IIS running on the background. Oh, right? Can't type in them anymore, right? They're disabled, right? They have that disabled look to them. Okay, clear them out. Thank you for logging in. Now, normally we'd move to the next page. We wouldn't be here, but I'm just using thank you for logging in as feedback, right? Okay, good. Let me refresh. You notice I still can't log in, even if I refresh, even if I go back, right? That's the only way I can get back to this. Okay, still haven't fixed this problem with this username, enter your username here. So what kind of, can you recommend? Remember, every time it'll fire my, you're shaking your head saying can't be done? We're just going back and forth? That's okay. Jean-Claude, what do you think? How do I fix this problem, right? So I want to make it so that when I click in there, it highlights everything, or maybe it's highlighted from the beginning. I could do that too, right? Highlighting from the beginning is a cheap shot, right? Because that means when I load, I can highlight everything. I can select all, right? But what I want to do is when I click in there, I want everything to be highlighted, right? Or I want everything to be, as soon as I click in there for the first time, only the first time when the text changed, right? I want to click in there, and then when I click away, right, it doesn't do it again. That would be bad, right? I'll show you what I mean. So let's say I do the event that we're talking about. I'll have to kill this event afterwards, but maybe you won't get it until you actually see it. So here's my code behind file, and here is my source. I'm just going to stop this for a second, stop debugging. I have to do it anyway. Here's my design side. I'll do what I did last time. I'll double click on this thing, and I create this text change event. So now I'm going to say this. This control, right, not the form, so username text box, right, dot. Now if you notice, here's all the different things I can do, right? Right. Text change, text mode, toString, visible, width, wrap. I want everything to be selected, right? So how do I select everything, right? I want to select everything that when I type in here, I want my entire text box, my text to be selected. Well, if I type selected, right? I can't. That doesn't do that. If I go text, can I go further? Can I do one of these? I could try this, but I'm not sure if that would work. So now I'm trying to do something I've never done before. What do? Docs. That's perfect. No, it's exactly what I would do. That's what I'm saying. So check the docs. So I'm going to say, select or highlight. So what I really want is a highlight text in text box ASP.NET, right? How do I do that? Stack Overflow takes us down here, and there's no solutions. It says rich text box.select. It's a rich text box. I don't have a select color. I want a regular thing. I know I can do it on a form control, a regular form, but how do I do that? I want only certain text selected, right? That just tells me some text. I can look at the field and whatever. That's not really the answer, right? Select text in the text box on focus. That's cool. I like that one. That's a good one, right? So here's our function select. My control. Okay, I can target it with CSS. That's good. And I can control select. I can use a select method to do it. That's not really what I'm looking for. This is going back to VB6, right? Anyone else have a solution yet? Selecting all text in text box ASP.NET. You guys want to try different things and you don't know how to do them. How do you do them? Got to look it up. Okay, they made some custom functions. Document.form1 text search.select. You want to use this, set selected, right? That's good. I want to set selected only when I click in there the first time. ASP.NET. There we go. I'm going to keep looking in the forms. I'm using this .page. Some funky stuff here. Something easy. So when I'm username and password, yes?
What if you use a placeholder instead?
That's the way. That's the way. That's the easiest way. Placeholder is HTML5. It's a special tag on HTML5. I don't have to use my text. If I want to highlight a text, there's a lot of work I'm doing here, right? I could do it, by the way. There's a way to do it. But it's a lot of work that I'm going to do for placeholder text, right? I like your solution. So let's do that. So let's instead of doing this, right? I don't want that happening. Let's go back to our source, and where it has our text box, right? Instead of this on text change, first of all, if you notice, on text change is my event type, and this is my text. Enter your username. Let's change this, right? Instead of to placeholder, right? So let's go in here. I'm gonna, just to type it, I'm going to say placeholder. Is that how you type it? Placeholder like that? And enter your username. I'll just type it in here again, or username. And then get rid of this text altogether. Now we want to get rid of this, the event handler, because otherwise it's just going to be hanging in there in our code behind file, which we do not need, right? So let's go back into properties. I'm going to pin the properties in there. I'm going to go back into my event handler, and I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to get rid of it here, which will take the reference away from here. This is important. You can actually get rid of it here too. And then on the code behind file, get rid of it in here, which I've already done twice now. Okay, cool. So one little code behind file, blah, blah, blah. I want to run this thing. Let's see how it works. There's my thing. When I type in here, I start typing, it's gone. HTML5, right? Now it doesn't validate if I've entered a password or a username. It just, when you press login at this stage, it just tries to log you in. There is no validation. We're going to handle that later on, and it's too much for one little thing that we're looking at. So this is enough now that I have a little bit of styling. I'm using Bootstrap. I'm thinking I'm good now. I can probably go forward and at least have some kind of starter that I can start off with. It's not a complete Bootstrap template because I wouldn't mind if I had a nav bar. I wouldn't mind if I had other additional controls for navigation and so on. But for now, we're not going to handle navigation today anyway. So let's save our template the way it is. So let's kill some of this stuff. And how do we save templates? Does anyone remember how to do it? We kind of covered it. First, you have to stop debugging. It's the first thing you have to do. And then I can just close this one off. I only need to do it here. In fact, I can go back to my Solution Explorer, and I can even close this file down. I can go here on the blank page. First of all, I have to have everything saved. The other thing is I like to try and go into Team Explorer for those people who have been following along but can't follow along so quickly, and go to Changes. I got all these changes going on, right? I don't have any untracked files. I want to add this into my GitHub. So I'm going to go to created or added Bootstrap to project, right? Commit. All right, so we got another commit there, so we got everything that I have. I want to go home and unsync commits and sync. So now my GitHub page is updated. I want to save this as a template. How do I do that? Right, well, if I go to File, go.
Just file and export.
File, export template, right? Let's try this, export template. And we're going to go to project template. So there's my project template, and it's targeting COMP2007 lesson 3 part 1. That's the template I'm using. I go next. I'm not going to call it that, template COMP2001 lesson 3 part 1. I'm going to call it ASP.NET Web Forms with Bootstrap. Right? That's my template name. And I can give a description of that, right? So I can say something like, this template creates simple web form with Bootstrap styling. Here we go. If you have a custom icon for your template, you can make it in there. You can also add a preview image if you like. For me, I'm just leave those blank and click Finish. When I do that, it kind of sets up this ASP.NET Web Forms with Bootstrap.zip file. It's inside my Documents.Visual Studio 2013, my exported templates area. That's what happens automatically. And now I'm going to close this file down. I'm going to close my solution, right, to stop this one, right? My solution is closed down. I'm going to go to File, New Project, and this time when I go to my new project, I'm not going to, if I'm looking for my template, it's not here, right? It's got to be under C#, Visual C#. And if I scroll down, right, where my templates live, here's my template. There it is, ASP.NET Web Forms with Bootstrap. And it gives me my object right here, my little description. Now look at the name. My name is ASP.NET Web Forms with Bootstrap, and we're going to call this. I'm going to call this Web Forms 1, just as a test. Web Forms 1, right? I'm going to press OK, and what do I get when I do that? Well, it pulls in all the stuff I just did automatically, right? Without me having to do all that work again. To me, this is a time saver. This is where we're going to start off every time we get together, guys, for now. If we need other templates, we're going to do that. So create your template. This is one of the things I wanted you guys to do today. And now I want to connect it somehow. I want to deploy it to Azure, and that'll be the next step in the next movie. So we're going to stop right now and take a short break and come back.